Do you have an inner critic, that part of you that picks you up on everything you do? Well, I think we all do from time to time. I know certainly I do. And I just complained about the way I looked when I spoke to Jess a minute ago. Such is lockdown. Anyway, we all have an inner critic, but some of us have worse inner critics than others, and it can really impact their lives. It can stop them making progress. It can stop them making the right decisions for them, and it can certainly affect their self-esteem and their levels of stress. So today I'm talking to psychologist Jess Baker about this very common subject to try and shed some light on it, to see if we can find some ways through. But first of all, I'm going to ask Jess what it is that stresses her out on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, honey, so many things. I try to be the Zen warrior, I think time really stresses me out. I think when I'm not meditating, I do a daily 20 minutes. And when I don't do that, I really notice my mind flitting and time almost feeling like I'm not in control of it, and it just kind of flows away. And I'm working on so many different little things. I have to be really strict with how much time I give to things.
Yeah.
And often if I have clients, emailing saying, can we just have a quick chat? I have to prioritize, okay, how urgent is that really? And how urgent is the other other things that I'm doing? So for me, it's that time management piece. It's always an interesting relationship with time.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a good one to do a talk on or to do an interview on, because it's a very common problem. I love the idea of the Zen warrior. I think I try to do that, but I don't think I'm always as Zen as I could be when I'm being a warrior, though.
Anyway. They say it's a warrior, not a warrior.
Anyway. A warrior, yeah, a warrior. That I that's what I heard. Anyway, so let's talk about the subject at hand. What is the inner critic?
So let's start from the kind of very basics. We have about 90,000 thoughts a day, depending on where you look on Google, between 70,000 and 90,000 thoughts a day. Most of those thoughts are on repeat. Most of those thoughts are negative. The brain is not wired to be happy. The brain is wired to protect you and keep you alive. So when I talk about the inner critic, I'm specifically mentioning those thoughts that are not helpful. So the helpful thoughts are planning, working something out, problem solving, writing a to-do list, I've got that thing to do. Okay, I need to go and, pre-lockdown, collect the dry cleaning or pick up the kids, whatever it might be. That's useful. Those are useful thoughts. The unhelpful thoughts are, as you've already mentioned, I don't look very good today, or I'm rubbish, or am I really the right person for this job, or am I really the expert? How will people will laugh at me? I'll humiliate myself in some way. Those thoughts are, vast and varied. And we can have them on repeat. And what sometimes happens, actually, Tricia, what I found in my work, so I've been working on this subject for, personally, all my life, and with other people for the last 5 to 10 years, really. I've been doing a lot of work focused on the inner critic. And what I found is that we tend to internalize messages when we're younger. And when we're growing up, we have a parent or a teacher or a bully or somebody randomly actually might say something in the vicinity, the way you've heard it being said, and you've absorbed that judgment, that negative judgment, as your own. It's really strange, but some people actually do trace. When I work with people, I try and help them trace back to where they first heard it, or if there's a particular theme around something. And it might be as seemingly banal as your handwriting is messy, but every time you pick up a pen and you write, you hear that same thought. Yeah, and you might be in your 40s or your 50s, but it's that thought, that criticism that may not seem huge is still kind of nitpicking away at you.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's the kind of banal stuff, but then obviously you've got the more serious, horrible, cruel things that one says to ourselves. If we were to say them to a friend, we wouldn't have any friends.
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny how we do that, isn't it? I wonder why it is that we do that. We treat ourselves so badly in a way that we wouldn't treat even our worst enemy. It's very strange how we somehow think that that's okay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times we misconstrue the inner critic, and I have heard people say this quite a lot, where we say, oh, but it's helpful. You know, my inner critic actually helps me get stuff done. Because I'm berating myself and criticizing myself, I'm therefore going to deliver to a higher standard. And I think that's so sad and so tragic, because, and from my own personal experience of having a massive inner critic, that doesn't help you in any way whatsoever. That's just your inner critic messing with you again. You know, your inner critic doesn't want you to let go of it. Your inner critic wants to stay around and stay alive and kind of feed off your self-doubt and self-sabotaging behavior and say, there you go, I told you were rubbish, you are, aren't you? And instead, one of the two principles really I have towards working with the inner critic, Tricia, that I'd like to share with your audience is that you can't strive to get away from this thing. You can't bury it. You can't deny it. You can't stop it. It's unstoppable. It's always going to be there. It's part of your psyche. It's what you might refer to as your shadow self. And my approach is the opposite, because the more you try and get away from something, you know, the more you try and deny or delay taking action on something, what happens? It becomes bigger and bigger.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so my approach is to befriend it, to get to know your inner critic, like it's because it is part of you. And in a way, it might be even trying to be helpful. It might be trying to berate you so that you do the best job. But those thoughts aren't ever thoughts that we take action upon. So instead of working from this place of fear, and I call it healing that fear, we want to come from a place of self-compassion, which may sound really cheesy. And to anyone listening to this might go, oh, that sounds weird. I'm fine, thanks. That was my reaction to self-compassion and being kind to myself for many, many years. But then learning that actually I can still do a fantastic job, but when I'm motivating myself through liking myself or appreciating my values and my strengths, I can put those to better use, and I actually enjoy the journey much better than if I'm motivating myself through fear and anxiety.
It's a really interesting and complex issue, isn't it? I think there's something, because there's lots of schools of thought around this, and one area which I quite like is thinking of, you know, you said it's helping you, thinking of what is the positive intent. So if the positive intent is to help you be your best, then great. But acknowledging that's not the most helpful way. And okay, so how can I improve a little more? Is a more compassionate way of saying the same thing.
Yes and no.
You're allowed to agree.
Let's share some thoughts on that one.
To disagree, I think is what I should have said.
So I think there's this, you know, there are phrases. In fact, one of my coaching clients is using one at the moment. I've just asked her not to whilst she's working with me, because I think it's really unhelpful. It's like in every day and everywhere I'm getting better and better. Because that's actually feeding your inner critic. That's actually you saying to yourself, I'm not yet better. I'm not yet good enough. So please, can we remove that hope or desire for better that is driven by fear and anxiety of not being good enough? So I think from the self-compassionate perspective, we need to be coming from, I am already enough. I am good enough. I have enough skills. I have enough experience to do this thing. Yes, of course, if I look at the people that I'm comparing myself to, and normally I'm comparing myself to somebody who is nothing like me and not my peer, but someone with 10 years more business experience or a massive media following, or you know, whatever industry you're in, the most professional cake baker, then that's not helpful either. There are two things at play here. There's really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and it is very interesting, because I agree with what you say. But to me, because when people see me, they want to improve in a particular area. So what I'm trying to balance out is absolute unconditional self-acceptance within the context of, and you know, enjoying a process of evolving rather than judgment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, as I was going to say, like, the next part of the conflict is that, you know, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which actually was based on theory from Karen Horney, the first feminist psychologist. And it was her working along with Abraham as well, talking about, but there's a strive, we all strive to be better, yet we're also at the same time telling ourselves that we're not good enough. So how do we work with that dynamic?
Yeah.
You know, in the hierarchy of needs, I'm sure you know, you have this pyramid shape, and we're all working towards to getting to the top of it, where we self-actualize.
Yeah.
And we're looking to, like, you know, the Barocca advert. Do you ever remember that? Where like
Years ago.
and then, like, you know, on a treadmill in a park. It's just brilliant. That always struck me as, yes, that's exactly what most of us are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
This version of ourselves. And you're absolutely right. I think with managing the inner critic through being compassionate by saying, and I'm actually already there. You know, if I were to ask my friend or my boss or my colleague, how do you think I'm doing at the moment? They'd be saying, oh my God, you're fantastic. You're blowing them all out of the water. You're doing so well. Yet we discount that message. So we're good at internalizing the negative stuff, to come back to my original point. And we're really bad at internalizing the positive, nice.
So I wanted to pick you up on that, because that is so true, isn't it? So when you said earlier about the bad thing that somebody says, and often it is just very small, but sometimes we focus on the general message and pick up all of the evidence that reinforces that. Why do people find it so hard to internalize the positive messages which are also there?
And I do think that's fundamentally because of the brain structure and the way the mind works. When we look at how we naturally want to repel negative emotions and negative feelings, the way that we do that, we don't counter them with positive stuff. The way we do that is actually to focus on them more. It's almost because the brain is wired to protect us. You know, that fight or flight or freeze phenomenon we experience. We used to, you know, we've had that. We humans, mammals, have had that for a very long time, you know, however many millennia you want to go back, you know, 200,000 years, let's say. And what happens now, though, is that instead of how our ancestors would have had to, which is respond in the moment, you know, if my Uncle John, let's call him, came face to face with a cave bear, he would have had, his amygdala would have been firing, saying, run or fight, run or fight. You haven't got any time to think about this. No time to think problem solving skills, you know. You don't have those to draw on in that moment. And they were life-threatening scenarios. What's happening now is that we have perceived life-threatening scenarios, and we're reacting in exactly the same way to an email from your boss coming in at 9:30 a.m. saying, speak to me, phone me immediately, you know, or 4:30 p.m. saying, come into my office now. What's your immediate thought? Most people I speak to say, I've done something wrong. They jump to the negative conclusion. So we're seeing this pseudo, you know, neutral event, really, and he might or she might just want to be saying, hey, well done on that thing, you know, I just heard you on that client call and you were brilliant, but actually we jump to the negative conclusion because we're trying to protect ourselves. You know, it's that primal experience. The brain is taking over, a kind of emotional brain is taking over the logical brain, and that's when I say to clients, you've got to find the gap. You know, learning to find the gap, learning to listen and tune into that inner critic or those worrying thoughts, and then trying to pause on that, to catch it, to then say, do I really need to be worried right now? I can feel my heart racing. I can feel my palms getting sweaty. Is this really a life-threatening scenario, or is there an alternative way of looking at that? Maybe my boss does just want to say, well done, or maybe just checking in with me in a neutral fashion. So then you remind yourself in those moments that you've got a choice on how you respond to those negative thoughts. You don't just normally jump straight into them and kind of feel it and let those thoughts absorb you and your focus.
There's a phrase that I really like, which is, you don't have to believe everything you think.
Absolutely.
Isn't that just right? Do I have to believe this? No. Can I be open to believing something else? Yes. It's just kind of, I like to be a bit playful where it's appropriate. Sometimes it's kind of like, I'm doing that thing again, aren't I? Okay, let's just be open and see what he's got to say.
Yeah, and I do that too. And I think, Tricia, I think being playful and creative is really important. So when I work with people with their inner critic, I often ask them to, if they can, some people struggle with this and that's fine, it's not for everybody, but if they can, create a little persona or a voice so they can almost externalize the inner critic. And then it's easier to manage when it's not in your head. You're arguing with it all the time.
Yeah.
And there was something else what else did you just say that reminded me of something?
Is it, you don't have to believe everything you think?
Yeah, there was a quote from Hamlet on, whether it is or whether it isn't, your thoughts about that event are the things that count. That isn't the exact phrase. Oh, I was going to say something else. Anyway, let's move on. I'm sure it will come back to me.
Yeah. So there's a concept in NLP called distorting, deleting, and generalizing, and I think that's also at play. So we distort things to fit our self-concept. We generalize things, may not be so relevant here, but we also delete things. So deleting in our mind the evidence that actually we are good enough, deleting that compliment that somebody gave you, and really focusing on the negative thing that somebody might have said. So the understanding of that tendency we have to do those things, which we have to do to make sense of the world, because there's so much information. It's kind of a shorthand of trying to interpret things, but sometimes it can really get in the way of our self-esteem and our self-concept as well. Yeah. Do you have any other tips, Jess, that you can give to help people to overcome this? So I like the idea of the externalizing, and maybe giving it a silly voice or something like that. Or reducing the volume, maybe.
Exactly, that helps. So sometimes my inner critic might be, what seems to be a giant chimp, and then over time I can shrink him, and it doesn't take that long anymore. Oh, that's what I was going to say earlier about where your mind goes. I want to come back to that, because that's another little way of dealing with it. And I can shrink him and put him in a little airtight jar, soundproof airtight jar, and stick him on my desk and say, thanks for trying to protect me. That's not very helpful right now. I need to focus on this task.
Perfect.
He's still got a little place on my desk.
Yeah.
Now that I have another form as well, which is like, as a teenager, I used to have a nose ring and wear DMs and be kind of indie kid type thing. And my other, and I was an angry teenager as well. And my other little inner critic is a grumpy fairy, but she's like this indie kid fairy with DMs, and she sits on a little rock. And when I'm not listening to her, she goes into like uber grump, like a teenager would, like, no, you're not listening to me, no, rolling the eyes and side-eyeing everywhere. And it's like, just, personifying your inner critic in those ways. And it might be that you have more than one. It's not to say that you've got any kind of form of psychosis. It's just identifying the way in which you speak to yourselves. And which leads me to my next point, Tricia, is that you can also develop the kind voice you have in your head. The one that does say to your friends, hey, Tricia, how are you? Let me listen to you. Let me soothe you. Let me reassure you. You've got the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
Already do. So how about turning that on and into yourself, and developing that persona too? And it could be in the form of a compassionate self, or any persona that you wish to think of. I think of my auntie who passed away a few months ago. I've got a picture of her in my loft here, and I look for her for inspiration, because I know she's with me. And she was my compassionate soul. She would just never judge me and just always give me the best hugs, like the kind of hugs you never want to move away from. And we need to learn to do that to ourselves too. It's really essential. I call it parenting yourself. To do that, to be able to, I'm hugging myself a lot now because I can feel it, to reassure yourself and soothe yourself, and maybe even acknowledging, I feel really anxious and worried about this thing, and maybe that's stupid to worry about it so much, but here I am, and it's okay, and it's probably going to work out okay.
That's beautiful. Yeah. That calms straight away, doesn't it?
It really can.
I'm worried about this, and it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Those are reassuring, and the voice is very important.
Yeah, calling it out can really help reduce the shame. So telling someone or writing it down, you're journaling how you're really feeling is really important, again, because you're getting it out of your head, and you can look at it when you see it written down on paper. Or I even dictate it into my phone if I'm on a walk and there's something going on and on and on, and I'm ruminating on something. I'll just dictate it into my phone, and I can see it, and then I can engage my rational brain and think, yeah, it's not really anything to be worried about, is it? No, okay, what else to worry about?
Yeah, so externalizing it, almost, not being the observer of it rather than the experiencer of it.
I wrote that recently on a little Instagram. My latest proverb: be the observer of the wheel, not the hamster.
Oh, nice. Love that.
Tricia, let me just come back to something you said earlier, because you said how you were able to almost see it, I think. And I think you were talking about being playful and creative. And there's a thing that happens sometimes between like 3 and 4:30 a.m. that when you're worried about something, you might find yourself waking up in the middle of the night. And that used to get to me so much. It was almost like a chronic problem. And one of the ways in which I really find useful is using mindful self-compassion and just to kind of come back to the present moment, to remember, to catch those thoughts and to think, oh, here I am, and to come back to the soft, warm mattress beneath me, and to feel, and maybe even to physically touch and rub the duvet, or touch the mattress next to me, and to remind myself, in this moment I'm safe, in this moment I'm secure. This is just my headspace messing with me.
Yeah, that sounds like a beautiful grounding exercise, actually.
And you eventually get to the space where, because you know what your brain is going to do and what your mind is focusing on at the moment, like the drama, and if there's no drama, it will find drama. Now, if you can imagine this, okay, an empty black theatre, an empty dark theatre with one stage, nobody's in the theatre, and there's just like a halogen light. It's almost like this halogen light's coming from your forehead. It's like it's looking all around, like, come on, where's the drama? Where's the drama? I'm looking for something to happen, and it's almost laughable now that I can catch my mind looking for drama. Oh, I would go to that difficult conversation, or that particular scenario, or that thing where I embarrassed myself. And it's like, oh, you're so predictable. My mind is so boring, and my inner critic is so uncreative. You eventually, can get over it in that way as well. You always get kind of bored of it, really. So there are lots of different ways in which you can approach the inner critic. And I think using a whole suite of tools can be really useful, because at different times, different things work well.
Different times, different things work, and also people will respond more to one thing than another, depending on their nature. And I know you've got a program coming up, so I will put a link at the bottom of the page for people to link to. But I would also like to ask you, I ask all of my guests, if there is a book that they've read that has been particularly helpful to them, inspiring or useful, that someone also might benefit from. And I think you have a particular book in mind, don't you, Jess?
Yes, I do. It's called Self-Compassion, and it's by Dr. Kristin Neff.
You have it there?
I am. Do I have it? Shall I show it to you?
Yeah, sure.
Will you be able to see it because it's backwards?
If you put it, yeah, there you go. Oh, Kristin Neff. Oh, she's got a fabulous book, Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook.
Yes.
I would recommend on the back of that. Yeah, she's very good, isn't she?
It's lovely. And her style and her gentle style is really lovely. The whole suite, so you've got Tara Brach, you've got Professor Williams, so he used to be my lecturer at Bangor University. He's now focusing on mindful self-compassion. And there's lots of different ways in which you can apply these principles throughout the whole of your life. So I'm a little bit of an advocate, and I am trained in all of this as well. So I love weaving it into the cognitive behavioural work that I do with clients. It's really useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's been so helpful, Jess. Thank you very much. I do hope you found it helpful too. If you have, do please like and share, because you never know who might need this right now. Also, if you want to leave some comments below, that would be terrific. And if you haven't signed up already, do please do that too. Thank you so much.